"Dad," hears his daughter say. "The teacher forced me." Immediately, calls the police. The old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, its deep resonance echoing through the silent house. Claire Patterson, her mind still buzzing from a late-night work session, padded softly towards the kitchen. A glass of warm milk, she thought, might help lull her to sleep. As she passed her stepdaughter Emma's room, a flicker of movement caught her eye. The door, usually tightly shut, was slightly ajar. Claire paused, her hand hovering over the doorknob. A shadow shifted within, and suddenly, her stepson Max emerged, his lanky teenage frame silhouetted against the dim light of Emma's nightstand lamp. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. "Max?" Claire whispered, her voice a mixture of confusion and alarm. "What are you doing in Emma's room at this hour?" Max's eyes widened, a deer-in-headlights look flashing across his face. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, glancing back at Emma's door before facing Claire again. I was just checking on Emma," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "She had a nightmare. I heard her crying and wanted to make sure she was okay." Claire's brow furrowed, her mind racing with possibilities. Max had always been a caring older brother to Emma, but sneaking into her room in the middle of the night, it didn't sit right. "Is Emma all right now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Max nodded quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Yeah, she's fine. Fast asleep. I should get back to bed." He edged past Claire, not meeting her eyes, and hurried down the hallway to his own room. Claire stood there for a long moment, her need for warm milk forgotten. She peered into Emma's room, seeing the gentle rise and fall of her stepdaughter's chest as she slept peacefully. Nothing seemed out of place, but a nagging feeling tugged at Claire's gut. Something wasn't right. As she finally made her way to the kitchen, Claire's mind whirled with questions. Max's explanation was plausible, wasn't it? He and Emma had always been close, even before Claire married their father, Rob. It was natural for an older brother to want to comfort his sister after a bad dream. But why did Max look so panicked when she caught him? Claire sipped her milk, leaning against the cool marble countertop. The digital clock on the microwave blinked 12:17 a.m., its red numbers a stark reminder of the lateness of the hour. She should go to bed, she told herself. She had an early meeting tomorrow, and Rob would be returning from his business trip. There would be time to sort this out in the morning. But as she climbed back into bed, sleep eluded her. Claire tossed and turned, her mind replaying the scene in the hallway over and over. Max's nervous expression, the way he couldn't meet her eyes, the slight tremor in his voice as he explained himself. It all pointed to something more than a simple act of brotherly concern. Claire had always prided herself on the bond she'd formed with her stepchildren. It hadn't been easy. Stepping into the role of stepmom 2 years ago when she married Rob, Max, at 16, had been initially resistant, while 14-year-old Emma had been more welcoming but still guarded. Over time, though, they'd found their rhythm as a family, or so Claire had thought. Now, lying in the dark, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that there was a whole other dynamic at play in her home, one that she'd been blind to. What if Max's intentions weren't as innocent as he claimed? What if Emma was in some kind of trouble? The possibilities made Claire's stomach churn. As the first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, Claire made a decision. She wouldn't confront Max or Emma directly, not yet. But she would watch them closely, look for any signs that something was amiss. If there was a problem, she was determined to get to the bottom of it. Her family's safety and well-being depended on it. Little did Claire know, this midnight encounter was just the beginning of a journey that would test her perceptions, challenge her assumptions, and ultimately reshape the very foundation of her blended family. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the muddy thoughts swirling in Claire's mind. She moved through her morning routine on autopilot, her attention focused on the interactions between Max and Emma at the breakfast table. The air seemed thick with an unspoken tension, a subtle shift in the family dynamic that Claire couldn't quite put her finger on. Max slouched in his chair, pushing his cereal around the bowl without eating much. His eyes darted up occasionally, meeting Emma's gaze before quickly looking away. Emma, usually chatty and full of energy in the mornings, was uncharacteristically quiet. She kept her head down, her long brown hair forming a curtain around her face as she nibbled on a piece of toast. "Everything okay, kids?" Claire asked, trying to keep her voice light and casual. "You both seem a bit tired this morning." Max's spoon clattered against his bowl. "Fine," he mumbled, not looking up. "Just didn't sleep well." Emma nodded in agreement, still not meeting Claire's eyes. "Yeah, same. Must be something in the air." Claire's gaze flickered between them, noting the way Emma's shoulders tensed when Max spoke, the slight tremor in Max's hand as he reached for his glass of orange juice. These were her kids, or at least, she'd come to think of them as hers over the past 2 years. She thought she knew them, could read their moods and understand their silences. But now, watching them avoid each other's eyes across the breakfast table, Claire felt like she was looking at strangers. As the kids gathered their backpacks and headed for the door, Claire called out, "Emma, honey, can you hang back for a minute? I wanted to ask you something." Emma froze, her hand on the doorknob. She turned slowly, her face a mask of forced neutrality. "Sure, what's up?" Claire waited until Max had left, the sound of his footsteps fading down the driveway. "I just wanted to check in," she said gently. "You seemed a bit off this morning. Is everything all right at school? With your friends?" For a moment, something flickered in Emma's eyes. Fear? Guilt? Before she plastered on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything's fine, Claire. Really, I'm just tired. Like I said, maybe coming down with something." Claire nodded, not wanting to push too hard. "Okay, sweetie. You know you can always talk to me if something's bothering you, right? About anything?" "I know," Emma said quickly, already turning back to the door. "Thanks, Claire. I've got to go, don't want to be late." As the door closed behind Emma, Claire sank into a kitchen chair, her mind racing. She'd always thought of herself as an observant person, someone who could read between the lines and sense when something was off. But now, faced with the palpable tension between Max and Emma, she felt completely out of her depth. Should she tell Rob? The thought had been nagging at her since the night before. Her husband was due back from his business trip this evening, and part of Claire longed to unburden herself, to share her worries and get his perspective. But another part of her hesitated. What if she was overreacting? What if, by voicing her suspicions, she created a rift in the family that couldn't be repaired? Claire's phone buzzed, a reminder popping up on the screen. She had a meeting in an hour, a big presentation that could lead to a promotion. She should be focusing on that, running through her talking points one last time. Instead, her mind kept circling back to the image of Max sneaking out of Emma's room, to the awkward silence at the breakfast table. As she gathered her things for work, Claire made a decision. She wouldn't tell Rob, not yet. Not until she had more to go on than a gut feeling and a few odd behaviors. She'd watch, she'd listen, and she'd try to piece together what was really going on with her stepchildren. The day dragged on, Claire's mind only half on her work. Every spare moment was spent turning over the morning's events, analyzing every word, every gesture. By the time she pulled into the driveway that evening, her head was pounding with the effort of keeping her worries at bay. Rob's car was already in the garage, and as Claire walked into the house, she could hear the sounds of dinner being prepared, laughter floating from the kitchen. For a moment, listening to her family's voices, Claire felt a wave of guilt wash over her. How could she be harboring such dark suspicions about these people she loved? But then she rounded the corner into the kitchen, and the scene before her made her breath catch. Rob was at the stove, stirring a pot of pasta sauce. Max and Emma were setting the table, moving around each other with a careful distance that seemed too deliberate to be natural. As Claire watched, Emma reached for a stack of plates at the same moment Max did. Their hands brushed, and Emma jerked away as if she'd been burned, nearly dropping the plates. "Whoa, careful there!" Rob laughed, Oblivious to the tension Claire could feel radiating through the room. "We don't need any broken dishes to clean up," Claire plastered on a smile, stepping fully into the kitchen. "Hey, family! Smells great in here!" As Rob turned to greet her with a kiss, Claire's eyes met Max's over her husband's shoulder. The look in her stepson's eyes, a mixture of guilt, fear, and something else she couldn't quite name, sent a chill down her spine. In that moment, Claire knew. Whatever was going on between Max and Emma, it was more than just typical sibling squabbles or teenage moodiness. There was a secret here, one that threatened to unravel the fabric of their family, and Claire was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. The next few days passed in a blur of stolen glances and hushed conversations that abruptly ended whenever Claire entered a room. She felt like a detective in her own home, hyper-aware of every interaction between Max and Emma, analyzing every word and gesture for hidden meanings. One afternoon, while the kids were at their after-school activities, Claire found herself standing outside Emma's bedroom door. She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, a war raging within her. On one side was her deep-seated respect for privacy, the trust she'd worked so hard to build with her stepchildren. On the other was the gnawing worry that had taken root in her gut, the fear that something was seriously wrong. "I'm doing this to protect them," Claire whispered to herself, as if saying it aloud could justify the invasion of privacy she was about to commit. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped into Emma's room. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Posters of pop stars and movie heartthrobs adorned the walls. A jumble of textbooks and notebooks sprawled across the desk. Claire moved carefully through the space, unsure of what she was looking for, but certain she would know it when she saw it. She opened drawers, rifled through papers, even checked under the mattress, feeling more and more like a character in a bad spy movie with each passing moment. Just as she was about to give up, convinced she was letting her imagination run wild, her foot caught on something under the bed. Kneeling down, Claire reached under and pulled out a shoebox. It was old and battered, covered in faded stickers and doodles. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside was a jumble of items that, at first glance, seemed innocuous. Crumpled notes, small trinkets, a few photographs. But as Claire sifted through the contents, her heart began to race. One note, written in Emma's looping handwriting, caught her eye. "Please don't tell Dad." Claire's mind reeled. What could be so serious that Emma felt she couldn't confide in her own father? She continued to dig through the box, each item adding to the growing knot of dread in her stomach. A cracked iPhone screen protector with what looked suspiciously like dried blood. A small bag of pills that Claire didn't recognize. A torn page from a diary with tear-stained words that made Claire's blood run cold. "I can't keep doing this. It hurts too much." As she sat there on Emma's bedroom floor, surrounded by these fragments of her stepdaughter's secret life, Claire felt a wave of guilt crash over her. How had she missed the signs? How long had Emma been struggling with whatever this was? The sound of the front door opening jolted Claire back to reality. She quickly shoved everything back into the box and slid it under the bed, her heart pounding as she heard footsteps on the stairs. "Claire, you up here?" Rob's voice called out. "Just a second," Claire responded, her voice sounding strained even to her own ears. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself before stepping out into the hallway. Rob was standing at the top of the stairs, a quizzical look on his face. "Everything okay? You look a little flushed." Claire forced a smile. "Fine, just tidying up a bit. You know how messy kids can be." Rob chuckled, seemingly accepting her explanation. "Don't I know it? Listen, I was thinking we could all go out for dinner tonight. It's been a while since we had a family night out." The idea of sitting through a family dinner, pretending everything was normal while her mind raced with the implications of what she'd found, made Claire's stomach churn. But she nodded, knowing that acting out of the ordinary would only raise suspicions. "Sounds great. I'll let the kids know when they get home." As Rob headed back downstairs, Claire leaned against the wall, her mind whirling. She needed to talk to Emma, to get to the bottom of what was going on. But how could she broach the subject without revealing that she'd invaded her stepdaughter's privacy? The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of worry and indecision. When Max and Emma arrived home, Claire watched them with new eyes, searching for any clue that might shed light on the mysteries hidden in that shoebox. At dinner that night, seated in a cozy booth at the local Italian restaurant, Claire found herself hyper-aware of every interaction. The way Emma picked at her food, barely eating. The nervous glances Max kept throwing his sister's way. The oblivious contentment on Rob's face as he chatted about his day at work. As the waiter cleared away their plates, Claire made a decision. She couldn't let this go on any longer. Whatever was happening with Emma, whatever secret Max was potentially involved in, it needed to be addressed. The safety and well-being of her family were at stake. "How about we all go for a walk when we get home?" Claire suggested, trying to keep her voice light. "It's such a beautiful evening." Rob readily agreed, always up for family time. Max and Emma exchanged a quick glance before nodding, their reluctance palpable but unexpressed. As they strolled through their neighborhood in the warm evening air, Claire's mind raced, trying to formulate the right words, the right approach. She knew that one wrong move could shatter the fragile peace of their family, but the alternative, letting her children continue to suffer in silence, was unthinkable. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, Emma's phone chimed with a text message. The girl glanced at her screen, and Claire saw all the color drain from her face. "Emma, what's wrong?" Rob asked, noticing the change in his daughter's demeanor. Emma looked up, her eyes wide with fear. I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All of you." In that moment, as they stood there on the sidewalk, the setting sun casting long shadows around them, Claire realized that whatever revelations were about to unfold, their family would never be the same again. The walk home from the restaurant had been tense, the air thick with unspoken words and mounting anxiety. As they filed into the living room, Claire couldn't help but notice how small Emma looked, perched on the edge of the couch, her shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself invisible. Max hovered nearby, his usual slouch replaced by a rigid posture that spoke volumes about his discomfort. Rob, still oblivious to the undercurrents of tension, settled into his favorite armchair with a contented sigh. "All right, Em," he said, his voice gentle but curious. "What's this all about? You know you can tell us anything, right?" Emma's eyes darted around the room, landing briefly on Max before fixing on a spot on the carpet. She took a deep breath, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I've been having trouble sleeping," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "For months now, I get these panic attacks, I guess, in the middle of the night." Claire felt her heart constrict. She glanced at Rob, seeing the concern etched on his face. "Why didn't you tell us, sweetheart?" he asked, leaning forward in his chair. Emma's eyes welled up with tears. "I didn't want to worry you, and I was embarrassed. I thought I should be able to handle it on my own." Max stepped forward then, his face a mixture of concern and resolve. "But you weren't alone," he said softly. "I've been helping her," he explained, turning to face Claire and Rob. "When I hear her crying at night, I go to her room. We talk, or sometimes I just sit with her until she falls asleep again." The pieces started to fall into place in Claire's mind. The late-night encounter, the tension between the siblings, the secrecy, it all took on a new meaning in light of this revelation. "Is that what was happening the other night?" Claire asked, looking at Max. "When I saw you coming out of Emma's room?" Max nodded, a flush creeping up his neck. "I'm sorry I wasn't honest with you then. I promised Emma I wouldn't tell anyone. I thought I was protecting her." Rob ran a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed. "Emma, honey, why didn't you feel like you could come to us with this?" Emma's tears spilled over then, running down her cheeks in silent streams. "I didn't want to be a burden," she choked out. "You and Claire, you've been so happy. And Max, he's been so kind. I didn't want to ruin everything." Claire moved to sit beside Emma on the couch, wrapping an arm around her stepdaughter's trembling shoulders. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, her own eyes filling with tears. "Oh, you could never be a burden to us. We're a family. Your struggles are our struggles." As Emma leaned into Claire's embrace, the floodgates opened. She spoke of the anxiety that had been building for months, the pressure she felt to be perfect in school, the fear of disappointing her family. She talked about the panic attacks that left her gasping for air in the dark of night, and how Max's presence had been her anchor in those terrifying moments. Max chimed in occasionally, filling in details from his perspective. He spoke of the helplessness he felt, hearing his sister's muffled sobs through the wall, and how he'd made the decision to be there for her, no matter what. As Claire listened, she felt a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. Relief that her worst fears hadn't been realized, guilt for having suspected something more sinister, pride in Max for his compassion and protectiveness, and a deep, aching sadness that Emma had been suffering in silence for so long. Rob moved to join them on the couch, enveloping both Emma and Claire in a tight hug. "I'm so sorry you've been going through this alone," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you're not alone anymore. We're going to get through this together." As the family sat there, intertwined in a tangle of limbs and shared tears, Claire felt a shift in the atmosphere. The tension that had been building for days dissipated, replaced by a sense of unity and shared purpose. "I think," Claire said softly, once the tears had subsided, "that we need to have a longer conversation about this, about how we can support Emma, and about how we can communicate better as a family." Rob nodded in agreement. "Absolutely. And Emma, we're going to look into getting you some professional help too. There's no shame in talking to someone who can give you tools to manage your anxiety." Emma wiped her eyes, a small smile breaking through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm sorry I kept this from you for so long." "No more apologies," Claire said firmly, giving Emma's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "We're just glad you've told us now. And Max," she added, meeting her stepson's eyes, "thank you for being there for your sister. You've shown incredible maturity and compassion." Max ducked his head, embarrassed by the praise but clearly relieved that the truth was finally out in the open. As the family continued to talk late into the night, Claire felt a renewed appreciation for the complexity of human emotions and relationships. She'd been so quick to jump to conclusions, to suspect the worst based on a few misunderstood observations. The reality, while still serious and in need of addressing, was a testament to the love and support within their blended family. Claire made a silent vow to herself as she listened to Emma and Max recount their late-night conversations. She would work harder to create an environment where her children felt safe sharing their struggles. She would strive to approach situations with an open mind and heart, rather than letting fear and suspicion guide her actions. As the clock ticked past midnight, Claire realized that this night, which had started with such tension and worry, had become a turning point for their family. They had faced a challenge together and come out stronger for it. And while there was still work to be done, Claire felt a sense of hope blooming in her chest. Their family wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And together, they could face anything that came their way. As the initial shock of Emma's revelation began to settle, a heavy silence fell over the living room. The ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed unnaturally loud, marking the passage of time as each family member grappled with the weight of what had been shared. Claire, her arms still wrapped protectively around Emma's shoulders, felt the girl's body tremble slightly, as if the act of unburdening herself had left her physically drained. Rob was the first to break the silence, his voice gentle, but firm. "Emma, sweetheart, I need you to know that we're here for you. Always. But I can't help feeling like there's more to this. Is there something else you want to tell us?" Emma tensed under Claire's arm, and for a moment, Claire feared they had pushed too far, too fast. But then Emma took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded. "There is," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It's about why the anxiety started." Max, who had been pacing restlessly near the window, stopped abruptly and turned to face his sister. His expression was a mixture of concern and something else, guilt, perhaps. Claire felt her heart rate quicken, bracing herself for what was to come. Emma's words came slowly at first, then in a rush, as if a dam had broken inside her. "It started after you and Claire got married," she said, looking at her father with tear-filled eyes. "I was happy for you, Dad. I really was. But then, everything changed. Our family dynamics, our routines, even our house felt different." Claire felt a pang in her chest. She had worked so hard to make the transition smooth for the kids, to be a positive addition to their lives rather than a disruption. Had she failed so completely? Emma must have sensed Claire's distress because she quickly added, I thought if I just pushed through, the feelings would go away." "But they didn't," Max interjected softly, moving to sit on the arm of the couch near his sister. "They got worse." Emma nodded, shooting a grateful look at her brother. The anxiety attack started small, just a bit of trouble falling asleep, some nervousness during the day, but then they got more intense. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like I couldn't breathe, like the walls were closing in on me. Claire felt her own eyes well up with tears as she imagined Emma suffering alone in the dark. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, pulling her stepdaughter closer. "That's when Max started helping me," Emma continued, her voice stronger now. "He heard me one night and came to check on me. Just having someone there, someone who understood, it made a huge difference." Max reached out and squeezed Emma's hand. "I remember that night," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I felt so helpless at first, but then I realized that just being there was enough. We started talking, really talking, for the first time in years." Rob stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair in agitation. "I can't believe I didn't notice any of this," he said, his voice laced with self-recrimination. "What kind of father am I?" "Dad, no," Emma protested, reaching out to grab her father's hand. "I worked really hard to hide it. I didn't want you to worry, to think that I was unhappy with our new family." Claire's mind was reeling. All this time, she had been worrying about inappropriate behavior between Max and Emma, when in reality, their late-night meetings had been a lifeline for her stepdaughter. She felt a wave of shame wash over her, followed quickly by a surge of admiration for Max's compassion and maturity. "Emma," Claire said, choosing her words carefully, "I want you to know how proud I am of you for telling us this. It takes incredible strength to be vulnerable like this. And Max," she added, meeting her stepson's eyes, "thank you for being there for your sister when we couldn't be." Max ducked his head, embarrassed by the praise. "I just did what any brother would do," he mumbled. "I was so afraid of losing this, of messing up our family." "Oh, honey," Claire said, pulling Emma into a tight hug. "You could never mess up our family. If anything, your honesty tonight has made us stronger." As the family sat there, wrapped in a group hug that spoke volumes about their love and support for one another, Claire felt a shift in the atmosphere. The tension and fear that had been building over the past few days dissipated, replaced by a sense of unity and shared purpose. They had a long road ahead of them, Claire knew. Emma's anxiety wouldn't disappear overnight, and they all had work to do in terms of open communication and addressing their fears and insecurities. But as she looked around at the tear-stained faces of her family, Claire felt a surge of hope. This night, which had started with such fear and suspicion, had turned into a pivotal moment for their family. They had faced a difficult truth together and come out stronger for it. And while Claire knew there would be challenges ahead, she also knew that they would face them as a united front. As the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed the late hour, Claire made a silent vow. She would work tirelessly to create an environment where her children, both Emma and Max, felt safe, loved, and understood. She would strive to be not just a stepmother, but a true parental figure, one who could offer support and guidance without judgment. The road ahead might be difficult, but Claire knew one thing for certain. Their family was worth every ounce of effort it would take to heal and grow stronger together. The days following Emma's heartfelt confession were a whirlwind of activity and emotion for the Patterson family. Claire and Rob, still reeling from the revelation of Emma's struggles, threw themselves into researching anxiety disorders in teenagers and reaching out to mental health professionals in their area. The dining room table, once a place for casual family meals, became command central, covered in pamphlets, printouts, and lists of therapists specializing in adolescent anxiety. Emma, for her part, seemed to walk with a lighter step now that her secret was out in the open. Though the anxiety attacks didn't disappear overnight, the simple act of sharing her burden with her family seemed to have eased some of the pressure she'd been carrying. Claire often caught Emma and Max in quiet conversation, their heads bent together in the way that siblings who share a deep bond often do. The sight never failed to bring a lump to Claire's throat, a mixture of guilt for having misjudged their relationship and profound gratitude for the support they provided each other. One evening, about a week after the big revelation, Claire found herself alone in the kitchen with Max. She was preparing dinner, chopping vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary as she mulled over the events of the past week. Max was seated at the island, ostensibly doing homework, but Claire could feel his eyes on her. "Hey, Claire." Max's voice was hesitant, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Oh, can I talk to you about something?" Claire set down her knife, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she turned to face her stepson. "Of course, Max. You can always talk to me. What's on your mind?" Max fidgeted with his pencil, his eyes fixed on the granite countertop. I wanted to apologize for not telling you and Dad about Emma sooner. I know you were worried, and I hated keeping secrets from you." Claire felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She rounded the island and pulled Max into a tight hug, feeling him stiffen for a moment before relaxing into her embrace. "Oh, Max," she murmured, "you have nothing to apologize for. You were being an incredible brother, protecting Emma when she felt she couldn't come to us. If anything, I should be the one apologizing to you." Max pulled back, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Apologize? For what?" Claire took a deep breath, knowing it was time to clear the air completely. "When I saw you coming out of Emma's room that night, I jumped to some pretty terrible conclusions. I thought something inappropriate might be happening between you two. I even searched Emma's room, looking for evidence." She expected anger, perhaps even disgust, but Max's face softened with understanding. "That's why you've been watching us so closely," he said, realization dawning in his eyes. "Claire, I get it. You were worried about us, and honestly, if I'd been in your shoes, I might have thought the same thing." Claire felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by Max's maturity and forgiveness. "You're an amazing young man, Max," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud to be your stepmom." Max ducked his head, embarrassed by the praise, but Claire could see the small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Thanks." As the family gathered around the dinner table, Claire couldn't help but notice the change in atmosphere. Gone was the tension that had permeated their meals in recent weeks. Instead, there was a sense of openness, of barriers broken down and bridges built. Rob, who had thrown himself into researching anxiety management techniques, shared some breathing exercises he'd learned. "I thought we could try them together," he suggested, looking around the table with a mixture of hope and determination. As a family, Emma, who might have balked at such a suggestion just a week ago, nodded eagerly. "That sounds great, Dad," she said, her voice stronger and more confident than Claire had heard in months. As they worked through the breathing exercises together, Claire felt a profound sense of unity wash over her. This was what family was about, she realized. Not perfection, not the absence of problems, but the willingness to face challenges together, to support each other through the tough times. After dinner, as Claire was loading the dishwasher, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found Emma standing there, twisting the hem of her shirt nervously. "Claire?" Emma said softly. "Can we talk for a minute?" Claire nodded, drying her hands and following Emma to the couch in the living room. As they sat down, Emma took a deep breath, seeming to gather her courage. I just wanted to say thank you, she began, for everything you've done this past week, for not giving up on me, even when I was pushing everyone away. Claire felt her heart swell with love for her stepdaughter. Oh, Emma, she said softly, reaching out to take the girl's hand. You never have to thank me for that. You're family, and that means we're in this together, no matter what. Emma's eyes welled up with tears, but she smiled through them. I know, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I've been doing a lot of thinking this week, about family and what it means. Claire nodded encouragingly, sensing that Emma had more to say. When you and Dad got married, Emma continued, her voice wavering slightly, I was scared. I thought having a stepmom meant I was somehow betraying my real mom's memory. But this week, seeing how hard you've worked to help me, how much you care, I realized something. Emma paused, taking a deep breath before meeting Claire's eyes. You're not just my stepmom, Claire. You're my mom too, in every way that matters, and I'm so grateful for that. Claire felt tears spill down her cheeks as she pulled Emma into a tight hug. Oh, sweetheart, she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. You have no idea how much that means to me. I love you so much, Emma. Not because I have to, but because of who you are, this brave, beautiful, incredible young woman. As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, Claire felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey wasn't over. Emma still had a long road ahead in terms of managing her anxiety, and they all had work to do in strengthening their family bonds. But in this moment, Claire knew without a doubt that they would face whatever challenges came their way together. The sound of footsteps on the stairs broke their embrace. Rob and Max appeared, carrying board games and a bowl of popcorn. Family game night? Rob suggested, a hopeful smile on his face. Emma wiped her eyes, grinning up at her father and brother. Sounds perfect, she said, making room on the couch for them to join. As they set up the game, laughter and playful banter filling the room, Claire looked around at her family with a full heart. This wasn't the perfect family she had once imagined. It was something far better. It was real, with all its complexities and challenges, its moments of doubt and moments of profound connection. She caught Rob's eye across the coffee table, seeing her own joy and gratitude reflected in his gaze. They had weathered a storm together and come out stronger for it. And whatever the future held, Claire knew they would face it as a united front, not just a family by marriage, but a family bound by love, understanding, and an unshakable commitment to supporting each other through thick and thin. As weeks turned into months, the Patterson household settled into a new rhythm. The initial shock of Emma's revelation had given way to a focused determination to address her anxiety and strengthen their family bonds. Claire found herself marveling at the resilience of her blended family, watching with pride as they navigated this challenging terrain together. Emma's therapy sessions became a regular part of their routine. Twice a week, Claire or Rob would drive her to Dr. Simmons' office, a warm and inviting space that Emma had come to see as a safe haven. At first, Emma had been reluctant to open up to a stranger, but Dr. Simmons' gentle approach and genuine empathy had quickly won her over. One evening, as Claire was preparing dinner, Emma bounded into the kitchen, her face glowing with an excitement Claire hadn't seen in months. "Guess what?" Emma exclaimed, barely containing her enthusiasm. "Dr. Simmons taught me this new technique for managing my anxiety. It's called grounding, and it's like having a superpower against panic attacks." Claire set down the wooden spoon she'd been stirring with, giving Emma her full attention. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Can you show me how it works?" Emma nodded eagerly, launching into an explanation of the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. As Claire watched her stepdaughter demonstrating the method, pointing out 5 things she could see, 4 she could touch, 3 she could hear, 2 she could smell, and 1 she could taste, she felt a surge of hope. This was tangible progress, a real tool Emma could use to combat her anxiety. "You know what?" Claire said, an idea forming. "Why don't we make this a family activity tonight? You can teach all of us the technique. It might be helpful for everyone, not just in anxiety-inducing situations. Emma's eyes lit up at the suggestion. Really? You think Dad and Max would want to learn it too? I'm sure they would, Claire assured her. In fact, why don't you go set the table? I'll finish up here, and we can have a family meeting over dinner. As Emma skipped off to the dining room, Claire felt a warmth spread through her chest. The open communication they'd all been working on was paying off. Emma was no longer hiding her struggles or her triumphs, but sharing them freely with her family. Dinner that night turned into an impromptu therapy session, with Emma taking the lead. Claire watched with pride as her stepdaughter confidently explained the grounding technique to Rob and Max, her earlier nervousness replaced by a sense of empowerment. "This is great, Em," Rob said, his voice filled with genuine interest. "I can see how this would be helpful in all sorts of stressful situations. Heck, I might use it before my next big presentation at work." Max, who had been quietly absorbing the information, spoke up. "Hey, what if we made this a regular thing? Like, once a week, we could have a family check-in. We could share any new coping strategies we've learned, or just talk about how we're feeling." Claire felt her heart swell with pride at Max's suggestion. "That's an excellent idea, Max," she said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "What do you all think? Sunday night family check-ins?" The enthusiastic agreement from everyone around the table was a far cry from the tension-filled family dinners of just a few months ago. As Claire looked at the faces of her loved ones, she realized how far they'd come. Later that night, as Claire was getting ready for bed, she heard a soft knock at the bedroom door. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Rob. To her surprise, it was Max who poked his head in. "Hey, Claire, got a minute?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Of course, sweetie. What's on your mind?" Claire patted the bed beside her, inviting Max to sit. Max perched on the edge of the bed, fidgeting with the hem of his t-shirt. I wanted to thank you," he said, his eyes fixed on the carpet. "For everything you've done for Emma, for all of us really." Claire felt a lump form in her throat. "Oh, Max," she began, but he held up a hand, indicating he had more to say. "No, let me finish," he insisted. "I know it hasn't been easy, becoming part of our family, and I know I didn't always make it easy for you. But seeing how you've handled everything with Emma, how you've brought us all closer together, I just want you to know that I'm really glad you're here, that you're part of our family." Tears pricked at Claire's eyes as she pulled Max into a tight hug. "Thank you, Max," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you could ever know." As Max left the room, Claire found herself reflecting on the journey of the past few months. The midnight discovery that had initially filled her with fear and suspicion had ultimately led to a strengthening of their family bonds. They had faced a crisis together and come out stronger for it. Claire realized that the most valuable lesson she'd learned was the importance of open communication and trust within a family. By creating an environment where everyone felt safe to express their feelings and struggles, they had built a foundation of support that could weather any storm. As she crawled into bed beside Rob, who was already softly snoring, Claire felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Their family wasn't perfect. No family was, but it was theirs. And together, they had the strength, love, and resilience to face whatever challenges life might throw their way. In the quiet of the night, as Claire drifted off to sleep, she made a silent vow to herself. She would never again let fear and suspicion cloud her judgment. Instead, she would approach each day with an open heart and mind, ready to listen, support, and love her family unconditionally. For in the end, that was what truly mattered: the love and trust they shared, the bonds that held them together through thick and thin. And as the moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the peaceful household, Claire knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, as a family.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.